Hello, and welcome to Virtual Investor Conferences. On behalf of OTC Markets, we are very pleased you've joined us for the third day of our Precious Metals and Critical Minerals Conference. The next presentation of the day is from Ionic Rare Earths. Please note you may submit questions for the presenter in the box to the left of the slides. You can also view a company's availability for one-on-one meetings by clicking Book a Meeting. At this point, I am very pleased to welcome Tim Harrison, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Ionic Rare Earths, which trades on the OTCQB venture market under the symbol IXRRF and on ASX under the symbol IXR. Welcome back, Tim.
Hi, Lily. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning from Australia. So, Ionic Rare Earths, we are, as Lily said, an Australian-listed company. We've recently commenced trading on the OTC market, and we're focused as a business on the rare earth supply chain. More so focused over the past 4 years in the back end of the supply chain now through recycling, the production of rare earth oxides, ultimately flowing into the Western supply chain. Just our cautionary statement. So as I mentioned, our focus as a business has really been around the back end of the supply chain, now producing the materials for new Western capacity, alternative to the existing Chinese capacity to come online. We're looking at building a resilient, integrated supply of magnet rare earth oxides that can be facilitated into new metals, alloys, and magnet capacity. And it's certainly an area of tremendous focus at the moment in the West. We're certainly seeing a lot of investment and allocation of funding at the moment in the US around new magnet capacity. But new magnet capacity is predicated on the availability of magnet rare earth oxides. And we do see recycling as being the fastest mechanism to provide those materials to unlock and to see the new capacity that's being built today. We have a 100% owned subsidiary in the UK called Ionic Technologies, which has developed rare earth separation technology. We're applying that technology in refining of both primary supply, but over the last few years, we've really focused our efforts on recycling. And the recycling enables us to provide material domestically within the Western countries, sovereign capacity, traceable materials, secure supply for separated neodymium and praseodymium oxides, dysprosium oxides, and terbium oxides. And in addition to that, we're also looking at producing some other heavy rare earth oxides, which are becoming increasingly more important on the back of export restrictions that were put in place last year. As I mentioned, we do see recycling as the fastest mechanism to bring new supply to the West. And with the technology that we're developing in the UK, we're now charting the path to hyperscale the technology, whereby we're looking at replicating what we're doing in Belfast now in the US. We have an MOU signed with a partner in Missouri, and we're also evaluating a number of other opportunities in the US. And in addition to that, we're in discussions with groups across the European market, the Asian market, and we also have a joint venture that we're developing down in Brazil called Viridian, which will look at the ability to take our technology on rare earth separation, apply that to primary supply, but initially to recycling. And finally, to round out our offering, we have a heavy rare earth deposit in Uganda, which is a development-ready asset. We are mine permitted, environmental permits. We've completed a feasibility study back in 2023, and we're now in discussions with a range of strategic partners looking at facilitating the funding, financing to develop a project for the material to flow into the US supply chain. Certainly last week, or over the last fortnight, we've seen a lot of focus around public statements in the US on Western supply chains. One of the new initiatives, or a rebadged initiative, is FORGE, which is a Forum of Resource Geostrategic Engagement. And it's important to understand this was previously called the Mineral Security Partnership, so it's been around for a few years now. However, it's just been, it's gone through a rebadging. Importantly, Ionic now has two assets that sit within the Forge program and classified as strategically important projects under that Forge initiative. Our recycling technology with Ionic Technologies has recently been added to that initiative, and it joins Makuutu, which has been there now for a couple of years. So we've got two assets looking at the supply of heavy rare earths into the Western supply chain, and a mechanism whereby we're looking to facilitate initial supply into the West via recycling and the ability to produce multiple recycling plants, followed by ultimately the development of the Makuutu mine and refining capacity to produce separated rare earth oxides into the US and Western supply chains. So if we look at what we're doing as a business, our differentiating factors, we are a business that's focused on magnet and heavy rare earths. Now, the distinction here is that the heavy rare earths are the elements that China have obviously put the export restrictions on. But when we look at primary supply, i.e. the mines that are producing today, the bulk of those mines in the West are light rare earth assets, i.e. they produce a lot of lanthanum and cerium, which are very, very low grade, low value elements in excess supply. And maybe they produce around 20% of their basket as neodymium and praseodymium. When we look at Makuutu is about 71% magnet plus heavy rare earth. So if we look at the NdPr plus the heavy rare earth content, it's a very distinctive project, and it's very differentiated from the Mountain Pass and the Mount Weld supply chain that's providing a bulk volume of tonnage coming to the market today. So that's one of the big distinctions, and our supply chain is looking to have zero reliance on China. So we have established relationships across metals, alloys, and magnets. And through that, we're looking to build a more robust, resilient supply chain that can facilitate the secure, traceable, alternative supply that can flow into ultimately, a number of these strategic applications, whether it be military and defence, but certainly we've seen over the course of the last 6 months, a huge focus now starting to emerge on AI, data, robots. And again, they become massive drivers on the demand for rare earths into the future. So now I just want to talk a little bit more about our recycling technology, and that's Ionic Technologies. And what we like to think of it is taking a previously used material and upcycling that. So taking it from an end-of-life material, typically, those magnets made in the past have now been superseded by new blends, new ratios of rare earths. And so we're trying to extract those high-value heavy rare earths out to be able to deploy that on new capacity, new generation magnets that will facilitate wind turbines, EVs, and a number of military and defence applications, for example, plus support the magnets that will go into the robots that are going to power a lot of the future industry. As a technology and as a business, we acquired this IP in late 2021, finalised the acquisition in early 2022, and we've worked through lab scale, pilot scale, demonstration scale, and we've completed a feasibility, and now we're securing the financing to build a commercial plant, which we're aiming to have up and operational by the end of next year. That plant is set to be, that first plant is set to be in Belfast, where we've recently secured a cornerstone commitment from the UK government for £12 million on an £85 million development. The technology that we're developing is hydrometallurgical separation of rare earths. So it's a bit different to a number of the other recyclers in the space. And the value add that we're producing is our products being separated, which can be redeployed for ultimately the magnets, the next generation of sintered magnets. So separating the materials into high purity individual elements. We've demonstrated neodymium and praseodymium, dysprosium and terbium. We're making material, we're selling material. In addition to that, we've tweaked the circuit, and we're now adding capability to separate out a number of other heavy rare earths that we commonly see used as substitution in magnets over the last 30 years. And so adding the ability to separate out samarium, europium gadolinium, and also holmium. And in addition to that, looking at the technology and application of that technology to separate samarium cobalt magnets and also yttrium products. And we know recently that there's been a huge focus and huge escalation in the prices of those heavy rare earths ex-China. So effectively, we're producing the products that are now really seeing extreme increases in price and very tight supply. In the UK, we've developed a completely insulated closed loop supply chain, whereby we are recycling materials on behalf of a range of different partners. Upstream, a partnership with EMR, which is the UK's largest metals recycler, which also has a very large footprint in the US. We're recycling material from them and then producing separated rare earth oxides, which go to Less Common Metals, our metal and alloy partner, who produce the materials that go to our magnet subcontractors, being vacuum smelts and GKE and powder metallurgy. Those magnets that they're producing then flow into 3 different partners that we're working with as part of this initiative: Ford, Bentley, and Wrightbus, to produce the magnets that are going into ultimately the EVs and a range of different other applications. And in addition to that, working on the overall life cycle analysis. Now, this is an initiative that's been sponsored by the UK government and is a part of the mechanism that we're using to validate our supply chain as part of our plans to commercialise our business in the UK. Looking at another way at the technology and where we've come from 2022 at lab scale all the way through now to plans to be commercial production by the end of next year, we've worked through a number of programs with great support from the UK government. We've worked closely with the Advanced Propulsion Centre, systematically working through a process to de-risk the technology, and we're currently sitting at a technology readiness level 8, moving to TRL 9, which is effectively commercialisation. So we are one of the most advanced, if not the most advanced recycler in the production of separated rare earth oxides globally outside of China, and now looking to facilitate that technological advantage, that time advantage, to hyperscale technology from the UK into the US market. The feasibility study we completed in Belfast had a capital development of £85 million and a payback of roughly 2.5 years when we look at numbers applied from November 2024. Fast forward 18 months and the world's now a very different place, where a lot of those pricing estimates that were used in that feasibility study have been exceeded. We're now seeing much, much larger and dramatic prices on dysprosium and terbium as the West scrambles to find this material in order to be able to make the magnets that it's projected to need over the next decade and beyond. And so we're seeing, the disconnect between China's prices and now what's happening in the West. If we look at dysprosium, we're looking at almost 5 times the price of China's dysprosium if we look compared to a Western dysprosium. And on the terbium oxide, it's approximately 4 times. So there is a massive disconnect between the markets simply because the West needs dysprosium and terbium, and there's very, very little production of that outside of China. Based upon the EBITDA of the project, which roughly generates circa 90 million per annum, as I mentioned before, a payback of around about 2.5 years. And this is based on a 20-year life of operation. What we know about recycling is that it's very different to a mining business. A mining business is based on a reserve that depletes over time. Recycling is the inverse. That reserve increases exponentially. And so we see the opportunity to roll out a number of these recycling plants across key markets, especially the US. And if we look to a number of the discussions that we have going on right now, our MOU and our partnership that we're working with US Strategic Metals in Missouri is a key pillar of that growth. But in addition to that, we're starting, and we've been doing a lot of other discussions with different opportunities, partners in the supply chain. And so we do see the opportunity now to move with a number of recycling plants in the US over a very short period of time. Recently, we have secured the offer in principle of £12 million from the UK government via the Automation Transformation Fund administered by the Advanced Propulsion Centre. And if we go back to a couple of slides, the APC, the Advanced Propulsion Centre, has been a very strong supporter of the technology we've been developing and the materials going into ultimately a supply chain and a production base and a revenue centre for the UK that is significant. The UK has approximately 1 million people employed in the auto sector, and a lot of those jobs are transitioning away from internal combustion engines to e-drives. The production of e-drives is predicated on magnets. And so the UK has been very focused on supporting the development of this opportunity. We see the same opportunity emerging now in the US, the same opportunity emerging in Europe as governments and industry moves away from internal combustion engines towards electric vehicles and e-drives. There is simply a requirement for these magnets to be able to produce the motors that are competitive with those Chinese EVs. And so with the support that we've received from the UK government via this initial grant offer in principle, we're in discussions with the UK government, other branches of UK government, for additional funding, which will increase the overall support from the UK government. And we're expecting to have our capital stack completed by the middle of this year to reach a final investment decision, with the plan to then move swiftly into construction and ultimately the production of separated magnet rare earth oxides next year. Life cycle recycling and the technology that we have produces a dramatically lower carbon footprint. That carbon footprint is important to a number of the customers that we're working with today, especially those customers in Europe focused on their carbon and CO2 emissions. And so we continue to have a lot of engagement with customers now looking at that as a driver. But I would say over the course of the last 6 months, the focus now has moved beyond that pure impact on carbon. The focus now is I need material, I can't get material, and recycling is the mechanism to get that material. Our strategic location in Belfast. Belfast is the epicenter of the rollout of offshore wind and has been for a number of years now. It's got deep water infrastructure, deep water port, and that port effectively is the result of decades longer of strong historical shipbuilding. And so that infrastructure now is prioritised to be part of the massive push on the rollout of offshore wind. And the UK as a nation is projected to be a 12% consumer of global magnet demand by the end of this decade, driven by the rollout of offshore wind, but also the adoption of electric vehicles. So we see the UK as being a very strategic location for the commercialisation of our technology. If we cast our eye now to what we're doing in the USA and our MOU with US Strategic Metals, that is an incredibly important initiative for Ionic, and collectively ourselves and US Strategic Metals are engaging with various different branches of government to secure the support to rapidly deploy our technology in the US market. The US Strategic Metals site in Missouri is an 1,800-acre site that's fully permitted, that has infrastructure and buildings that we can move swiftly to deploy the technology. So we do see this as being a very quick strategic move to accelerate our position in the US market and be part of a solution now for US sovereign capability. The application of the materials that we're making and the prioritization of those materials into, let's say, for example, the defense sector in the US is significant. One of our plants could produce enough to supply the defense needs. However, what we're seeing is, and what we're hearing is, that those defense needs are escalating dramatically as technology is advancing at a rate of knots. So beyond what we see here, and a lot of these numbers sort of come from demand in a report back from 2021, we see huge opportunity now to have multiple plants in the US to support the need on those strategic needs. But beyond that, we've been inundated by a lot of requests from US-based advanced manufacturing that can no longer get access to dysprosium and terbium. And in addition to dysprosium and terbium, we're having discussions with groups about our technology and the application of that technology to produce a range of other heavy rare earth compounds. Next, I want to talk about our Brazilian joint venture, Viridian, which we see as a huge opportunity for the company, whereby we're looking to develop a refinery and magnet recycling to separate mixed rare earth carbonate from the Colossus project, which is Viridis's Colossus project, but ultimately then to be able to deploy the technology and to look at building US refining capacity as well. Back last year, middle of last year, through Viridian, we sourced magnets out of Brazil and then recycled them at Ionic Technologies facility in Belfast, and then delivered that material back to Brazil. And this is part of an effort there with partners that we've established on building a magnet supply chain in the Brazilian market. We see this as being hugely accretive for the business long term, as Brazil has very large resources and the potential to support a growing industry in decades to come. And so through Viridian, Ionic is very keen to stake an initial position in that emerging market and be part of a clear directive from government there around building the supply chain. And to that point, last year we secured support via an initiative, $1.4 billion initiative by the Brazilian government, administered by BNDES and FINEP, whereby Viridis and Viridian were selected as the only rare earth projects to secure financing as part of that initiative around value addition in Brazil. And so as we continue discussions in Brazil and progressing plans on now commercializing and developing technology, demonstrating technology and producing separated products, we've really positioned ourselves strongly with support with Brazilian stakeholders on the establishment of that value chain. Finally, just sticking with Viridian, in September, we received land from the Poços de Caldas municipality, whereby Viridian will now be developing a facility that will not only recycle magnets, but also build a refinery pilot plant so that we can demonstrate the separation of rare earth oxides from the Colossus project and be able to facilitate that supply chain. Finally, just to touch upon our Makuutu project. Now, Makuutu is in Uganda. We own 60% of it, but the asset is operated through our Ugandan entity, Rwenzori Rare Metals. We have 300 square kilometers of tenements that stretches roughly about 37 kilometers long. So the tenement and the deposit itself is actually larger than the island of Manhattan. We have a resource defined. We have an ore reserve estimates from a feasibility study completed in 2023. We have excellent infrastructure available to the project. We have environmental permits, and the mining license was approved in early 2024. We built a demonstration plant. We've produced mixed rare earth carbonate, and we're now working through a range of discussions with strategic partners. But what differentiates Makuutu from other projects in the rare earth space is the the proportion of heavy rare earths in our basket. I mentioned earlier 71% magnet rare earths plus heavy rare earths. If we look at the NdFeB, it's about 26%, which is considerable compared to a raft of other light rare earth projects that are in development or in operation today. But what highlights the strategic appeal of Makuutu is the presence of heavy rare earths. And if we're looking from samarium around to yttrium, it's about 45% of our basket as heavy rare earths, with 26%, over 26% being yttrium. And the case in point, what we've seen over the course of 2025 with the export restrictions from April through to the end of last year, yttrium started 2025 with a price of around about $5 a kilo. By the time we got to the end of 2025, if you had yttrium, you could sell it for $1,000 a kilo in the US market and the Western market. Such is the appetite for a raft. And yttrium is just one of the examples on the heavy rare earths. We talked about the escalation in the prices for dysprosium and terbium. But there is a range of other heavy rare earths that are now in such strategic and tight supply that the escalation in prices is very dramatic and highlights the insatiable need from Western advanced manufacturing to get access to this material. Feasibility study from Makuutu from 2023 had a capital development of 120.8 million. So if we assume for escalation, we expect a development of 150 million to develop the project today, and a payback. So that was a few years in order to pay back the project. It generates an appreciable NPV, but an increasingly strategic value for that asset. Finally, just our corporate snapshot. As of middle of this week, trading at about 48 Aussie cents, market cap of 108 million Australian, and 225 million shares on issue. We consolidated capital at the end of last year and finalised that earlier this year. And so we're now positioning ourselves for significant growth into the Northern Hemisphere markets. And so as we finalise with the key takeaways, the validated technology platform, we've demonstrated the tech and we're now looking to scale. We've got positive sector momentum. I think it's undeniable the focus that's been brought to rare earths and the disconnect that's now emerging between Western demand and Chinese capacity and Chinese export restrictions. A compelling economic profile demonstrated in Belfast with the ability to replicate that and improve that in a number of Western geographies. We've established strategic partnerships on the supply chain. We've got key partners and a range across the supply chain, metals, alloys, magnets, and customers. We've got a clear growth roadmap where we're looking to firstly develop what we're doing in Belfast, but now rapidly deploying the technology in other target markets. And we're building out our board and management team. We've recently added a couple of strategic advisors, and the business will continue to add resources as we look to expand our footprint in our target markets. And so with that, we can now move on to some questions, appreciating that quite a bit to go through. So first question I've got here now is, you now have or are planning touch points in the UK, US, Brazil, and Uganda. How does that geographic spread position you to benefit from different regional incentives, tax credits, and Inflation Reduction Act style policies over the next 5 to 10 years? I would say that our big focus, if we look at the UK, US, and Brazil, if we focus on the US, I think what we're seeing right now is the deployment of capital in a way that facilitates new capacity build out. Capital or financing being provided to de-risk the investment from public equity markets has been tremendous. And I think we're perfectly positioned to be able to capitalise on that with government support. if we look at what's happening in the UK with the capital grant that we've received and further support that we expect, we also expect through the discussions that we've been having with strategic advisors to move very swiftly now on the financing of the remainder of the build out. So I think, that financing piece is very important. Appreciating there's quite a number of other questions here that have come through, and I've run out of time, so I'll have to look to get back to individuals directly to answer those questions. Thank everybody for their time today.